Guys, so in the last session, we have done the UI part for our application. We developed UI for two modules. One is accounts management, and another one is reports module. UI we developed by using Angular. Backend is our Spring Boot, front end is our Angular, and we are able to establish the communication between the Angular application and Spring Boot application. So now let us see the summary of our 23 JRTP. So what we have learned in this 23 JRTP concept. So in the 23 JRTP, we discussed about the tools. Basically, the tools we learned. One is Maven. Maven is a build tool. We used that to build our projects. Compilation and all that stuff we have done by using Maven. And GitHub we have seen. GitHub we used as a repository, which is used to integrate our project to source code. Some projects will use GitHub. Some projects will use Bitbucket. We have seen GitHub and Bitbucket. Then we have implemented logging in our project by using log4j or SLF4j. Logging we have implemented, and log monitoring also we have implemented. Reading the log messages from the log file. So we can read the log messages from the log file by using putty or by using MobiXtrom. We have seen MobiXtrom to understand how to connect with that Linux machine to get the details. And we have seen Splunk also. We can't practice that Splunk, but I have shown the video related to the Splunk. And we have seen ELK stack. In the Kubernetes, we have done the ELK setup, EFK basically. Elasticsearch, FileBeat and Kibana, which is used to monitor logs of our application. Got it? Now, then after we have seen Postman, it is used for API testing. If you want to test your API, then we can go for the Postman. Then we have seen Swagger and Swagger UI that is used to generate the documentation for our REST API. Postman is used only for the testing purpose. Backend REST APIs we can test by using Postman. Swagger and Swagger UI we can use to generate the documentation for the REST API. Using Swagger UI, we can even test our REST APIs. Then we have seen SonarQube. SonarQube we used to perform the code review of our application. Then next one, we discussed about Agile methodology with the Jira. We discussed how to work with Agile methodology with the Jira. Jira is a project management software. Jira is a project management software. So work assignment will happen for the team members through Jira. So we can create the stories in the Jira and we can assign stories to the Jira. Complete project management can be done by using Jira software. And how to work with Agile methodology, all that stuff we have learned. Okay, good. And next one, we have seen what is JMeter. What is the purpose of JMeter, guys? Why we will go for JMeter? JMeter we used to test performance of our application. How to test our application performance by using JMeter. JMeter is used to test the stability of the application, responsiveness of the application. And we have discussed about Jenkins. Jenkins is used for CI/CD. If you want to deploy your application, if you want to automate build and deployment process of our application, then we are going for Jenkins software. And we discussed about Docker. Docker is a containerization software. So nowadays, people are following containerization technique to run the application. No need to do execution of the project manually. No need to install the softwares manually to run our application like database or Tomcat or Java and all. Whatever the dependencies are there for the application, those dependencies can be managed by container software. That's where Docker comes into picture. Docker we are using as containerization software. Then next one, we discussed about Kubernetes. Okay, what is Kubernetes? Kubernetes we used as orchestration platform. And recently, few people told that for the freshers also, they are asking the questions on these tools. Basically, these are DevOps tools. DevOps engineers are going to work with these tools in the company. But nowadays in the interview, for the freshers also they are expecting, do you know JMeter? Do you know Jenkins? Do you know Docker? Do you know Kubernetes? So they are asking these questions. And we have seen Kafka. Kafka is a streaming platform which is used to store our messages, to exchange the data from one application to another application. Then we will be using Kafka as a streaming platform. Kafka message broker will be available. One application will act as a publisher, another application will act as a subscriber. One application will store the messages in the Kafka topic, another application will subscribe to those messages. Now look at the tools that we have seen. Can you look at the tools that we have done? Guys, any other tool that we learned? Maven, GitHub, Bitbucket, logging, log monitoring, Postman, Swagger, SonarCube, Agile with Jira, JMeter, Jenkins, Docker, Kubernetes, and Kafka. Anything else that we have learned? In terms of tools, did we learn anything new? Redis we learned, Redis cache. If you want to implement Redis cache in our application, we can use this Redis cache. So if you want to improve performance of the applications, we are going to use this Redis cache. And we discussed about JUnit mocking, and Jacoco. JUnit is used to implement unit testing for our applications. JUnit with mock we have implemented. JUnit to perform unit testing of our applications. When we are performing unit testing of our applications, then we will go for mock objects. We are going to implement mocking for that. Mock objects are used to implement isolated unit testing for our application. Then Jacoco is available. Jacoco is a plugin that is used to generate code coverage report. How many lines of code is covered as part of our unit testing? We can do that by using Jacoco. From the tools perspective, we have covered almost 20 tools that we have learned as part of our JRTP. Okay, coming to tools, real-time tools. As a Java developer, everybody should know how to work with these tools. Build tools, repository tools, logging, API testing, code review, project management, performance testing, deployment, Dockerization, orchestration, Kafka, Redis, JUnit, Jacoco, all these tools are important for that. Then coming to our cloud platforms. Okay, coming to AWS cloud related, we learned about Linux operating system, how to create Linux virtual machines. We discussed about Linux commands, how much commands that are required, whatever the knowledge that is required from the Linux. We discussed about those Linux commands, how to create the files, how to edit the files, how to ping, how to download the files from the internet. Okay, how to see the content of the file. Those Linux commands we have discussed. Then after we discussed about AWS services. AWS services. What is AWS cloud? How to create account in the AWS cloud? What are the services available in the AWS we have seen? And we discussed about EC2 to create virtual machines in the AWS cloud. And we discussed about IAM to create user accounts. Linux operating system knowledge is required for every developer. We learnt about Linux commands and we discussed AWS services, EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud, which is used to create virtual machines in the AWS cloud, IAM, identity and access management to create the users and manage the users. We are going for IAM. We discussed about S3. S3 is used for storage purpose. If you want to store unlimited data in the AWS cloud, we can go for S3. And we discussed about RDS. RDS nothing but relational database service. So it is used to store up, it is used to set up relational databases in the cloud. Instead of we are managing the databases in our data center, we can go for cloud database. Instead of managing data center in our database, we can manage the databases, okay, by using AWS cloud platform. So that's where we are going for RDS service in the AWS to create the database in the cloud. Any other service we learned? EC2, IAM, S3, RDS services we have seen from AWS cloud. Okay. Then coming to interview preparation. We discussed about resume building. And we discussed about mock interviews. 2 to 3 people participated in the mock interview. The remaining people are not interested to participate. I asked several people to give the mock interview, but only 2 to 3 people are interested to participate in the mock interview. So we have conducted mock interview for them. In the AWS cloud, we discussed about Route 53 also, which is used to map our application domain name to the URL. Mapping our application URL to the domain name that we have done by using Route 53. And coming to the interview preparation, resume building and mock interviews. Mock interviews we discussed, and FAQs. Spring Boot microservices, 100 FAQs I have given. Project FAQs are available. We discussed about the FAQs and we discussed about do's and don'ts. Okay, joining formalities and all that stuff. What are the do's and what are the don'ts in the company? Joining formalities and exit formalities. Okay, so how to prepare our resume as a fresher and experience. So I have given that resume building and sample resumes also I have shared, and we conducted mock interviews for 2 to 3 people. Those videos also available in our channel. You can go through them. Frequently asked interview questions on core Java, around 50 FAQs I have given. Spring Boot microservices, 100 questions. Project interview questions, 85. And some non-technical questions also we have discussed, and I have given the list for that. Do's and don'ts available. What are the things we need to do as a software engineer in the company? What are the things we should not do as a software engineer in the company? And we discussed about joining formalities. So when you got selected in the company, what documents you need to submit, okay, and how you will get the joining letter and all that stuff. We have discussed all those informations. And exit formalities. If you want to leave the company, what is the process we need to follow? If you want to change from one company to another company, then what is the process we need to follow for that? That concept also we discussed, exit formalities. And coming to the remaining stuff, the most important thing that we understood, Java mini projects. Okay, so we discussed about mini projects. As part of mini projects, first mini projects we implemented as reports application. First one, reports application. How dynamic reports, report generation, reports API. Basically, I can say reports API, Excel and PDF reports, how to send Excel reports and how to generate PDF reports. That part we have implemented. And we discussed about employee portal. Okay, employee portal, front office portal we have developed. We understood how to create the account, how to send the emails, how to build the data based on that. And the third one, we discussed about user management. We discussed about blog application. Sorry, the third application is a blog application. How to develop a blog by using Spring Boot with Timely. How to develop blog by using Spring Boot with Timely. 3 mini projects we have developed. One is reports API, Excel and PDF functionalities we have implemented. Employee portal. We have seen Carousel with Bootstrap. How to implement Bootstrap in our project. How to make our screens beautiful. How to manage the sessions in the application. How to retrieve the data. How to add the inquiries. How to retrieve the inquiries. How to change the inquiries. That employee portal we have designed. And blog application. How to post a new blog. How to see the comments from that. How to add the rich text box for the blog. That blog application we have implemented. And we have seen how to read the YML file data into Java class. Okay, that part we learned here. And how to send emails by using Spring Boot application. And how to make Ajax calls with the Spring Boot. Ajax calls we have implemented as part of this. And the most important thing we learned here, database analysis and components analysis. When we want to develop one application, how to analyze the tables that are required for our project. What are the tables we need? How to establish the relationships among the tables. The DB analysis part we have done. Java components analysis. How many classes we need to take for our project? How many methods we need to take? What parameters we need to take? And what return types we need to take? Those things we have learned as part of this mini projects development. Reports API, Excel and PDF. Reports application basically we developed with the Timely. Reports application. Okay. Employee portal application. Employee portal application. Blog application. How to read YML file data into Java class by using properties file or YML file. And how to send emails by using Spring Boot. Spring Boot with Ajax calls. How to make Ajax calls with the Spring Boot. How to perform DB analysis. Suppose if you get one requirement, how to analyze the database. What tables we need, what columns, what relationships. Java components analysis. This part we learned as part of our mini projects development. Coming to major project, we discussed about major project description, project details, basically project information, project introduction. So when you go for the interview, this will play the most important role. How you are explaining your project. What is your project? Project introduction part we learned. Okay. Project architecture we have seen. Project architecture and project modules. Project modules. So we are talking about IES application. IES is Integrated Eligibility System. We developed this project for Rhode Island State Government. In this project, there are several modules available. We discussed about that project architecture part. Okay. So there are several modules like admin module, then application registration, data collection, eligibility determination, benefit issuance, reports, batches, like this several correspondence, several modules are available. Project modules we have done, project implementation, the backend APIs, project backend development, we developed backend APIs. I have given the analysis and some part of code I have written and I have given Git repositories also. Project backend development, Angular development. Okay, Angular UI development. I have created Angular project and we discussed it for 2 modules, 2 APIs we have integrated. Accounts management UI, reports UI we have implemented, Angular UI development part we have learned here. And in this backend development, we discussed about exception handling, how to implement exceptions in our project, and logging implementation in our project. Okay. And we discussed about multi-threading implementation in our project, how to implement multi-threading in our project. That part we have discussed. Angular UI development and front-end back-end integration. Spring Boot plus Angular integration we have discussed. Spring Boot plus Angular integration part we have learned. project introduction, project architecture, project modules, project backend development, exception handling, logging, multi-threading, Angular UI development, Boot plus Angular integration part we discussed. And parallelly, you guys attend Angular classes. Okay. So what topics you learnt in the Angular? So in the Angular, what is Angular? Angular version history. What is Angular? Angular is a client-side framework which is used to develop front end of the application. Earlier, Angular JS was available. Angular JS versus Angular. Angular JS and Angular developed by Google only. Angular JS developed initially by using JavaScript, but later point of time, they identified some challenges with the Angular JS. So they have rewritten the complete framework by using Angular. So currently people are using Angular, and we learned Angular architecture. So Angular building blocks available, right? Components, templates, services, modules, directives, types concept is available. Angular architecture, and we learnt about TypeScript. TypeScript is a programming language. It is used basically in the front-end development. So TypeScript is superset of JavaScript. We can develop the front-end projects by using JavaScript, but in the JavaScript data types concept, OOPS support is not available. So to overcome the challenges available in the JavaScript, people are using TypeScript. This Angular framework is completely developed by using TypeScript only. We understood what is TypeScript. Then components in the Angular, templates in the Angular, okay, data bindings in the Angular, interpolation, uh, property binding, event binding, two-way data binding concept is available. Directives available in the Angular, directives available in the Angular, pipes available in the Angular, pipes available in the Angular, dependency injection, DI, how to inject one object into another object, then services in the Angular, services in the Angular, routing in the Angular, forms in the Angular, forms development and forms validations, HTTP client module. This is the most important part for the integration part. What is Angular? Angular is a client-side framework. Angular JS versus Angular, Angular architecture, TypeScript. If you want to work with Angular, then TypeScript knowledge is mandatory. Components in the Angular, templates in the Angular, data bindings, okay, directives, pipes, dependency injection, okay. Then services in the Angular, routing in the Angular, forms development, HTTP client module in the Angular. HTTP client module we used to integrate our backend application with the front-end application. Coming to the major project, we have learned these concepts. So this is what we covered, right? Real-time tools. These are the tools that we have discussed, and these concepts we learned from the cloud. And for interview preparation, we discussed about these concepts. For mini projects, we discussed these topics. We learnt about these topics in the mini projects development. And coming to Angular, we discussed about these concepts in the Angular. And major project, this is the part we have discussed in the major project. Anything else, guys, which I missed to mention here? Anything else which I have missed to mention here? And we learnt about the microservices development, right? We learnt about the microservices concepts in our project. So what we learnt in the microservices, we learnt about what is monolith architecture. What is monolith architecture? Microservices introduction, microservices architecture, microservices architecture. We discussed about service registry, basically that we have seen with the Eureka. Okay, service registry. We discussed service registry with Eureka. Okay. Next one, we discussed about service registry, Eureka server, and we discussed about admin server, and we discussed about Jipkin server, admin server, Jipkin server, and we discussed about API gateway, cloud gateway. We discussed about cloud gateway. We discussed about cloud gateway, and we discussed about ribbon. We discussed about fee and client, and we discussed about ribbon for the load balancing. Right? Monolithic architecture, microservices introduction, microservices architecture, service registry using Eureka server, admin server, Jenkins server, cloud gateway, fee and client for inter-service communication, ribbon for the load balancing of our microservices. Ribbon we are using for load balancing of microservices. Are you getting my point? This concept we learned from microservices, monolithic architecture, microservices introduction, microservices architecture, service registry, admin server, Jipkin server, cloud gateway, fee and client, and ribbon. Config server also we learned how to work with the config server. If you want to externalize configuration properties from our application, if you want to externalize configuration properties from our application, then we are going to use config server in our project. If you want to externalize configuration properties of our application, then we are going to use config server concept. Okay. And we discussed about web client and REST template. That's fine. Inter-service communication or external service communication we can do by using REST template and all. And we discussed about security concept. Okay. We discussed about Spring security. So in the Spring security, we understood basic HTTP basic security, HTTP basic authentication, user details service, HTTP basic authentication, in-memory authentication, JDBC authentication, HTTP basic auth, in-memory authentication, and we discussed about JDBC authentication, and we discussed about user details service in the Spring security, OAuth in the Spring security, OAuth in the Spring security, and we discussed about JWT, and role-based authentication also we have implemented. Role-based authentication. For particular user, only particular method access we can provide by using role-based authentication. These concepts we learned in the Spring security. HTTP basic authentication, in-memory authentication, JDBC authentication, user details service, role-based authentication, OAuth 2.0, and JWT authentication also we have done. OAuth authentication and JWT authentication we have learned. Got my point? Yeah. Tools, cloud, interview guide, mini projects, major project, microservices, security, Angular, major project, and interview preparation. So this is what we have done in our course. Spring batch also we learnt. In the microservices, let me add Spring batch concept also we discussed. How to work with batch implementation in the Spring. If you want to deal with millions of records, either you want to load the data from the Excel file to DB or DB to Excel. If you want to perform such kind of bulk operation, then we can go for Spring batch concept. We covered that Spring batch also. Right. Data JPA, MVC, those are part of Spring Boot course, not from the project. So especially from the project batch, we have learned these concepts. Resilience 4J also we have learned. That is circuit breaker. Basically, we learned about circuit breaker here. How to implement circuit breaker, Resilience 4J. To implement fault tolerant systems. If you want to develop fault tolerant systems, then we are going for this circuit breaker concept. So when there is some problem in one API method, I want to execute the fallback logic for that. We are going for this fallback logic. If there is any problem, then we can go for that fallback logic implementation. Anything else? Here, self-introduction part. Self-introduction in the interview. Roles and responsibilities for the interview. Several times I have explained project explanation. How to explain project in the interview. Resume building, mock interviews, FAQs, do's and don'ts, self-introduction, roles and responsibilities, project explanation, joining formalities, exit formalities. Okay. Good guys, with this we are done. So whatever is there in the syllabus, JRTP. So I hope as per the syllabus, whatever is required basically to attend the interviews, to work in the project as a Java developer, that concepts we have covered here. And now it's to you how much you practiced, how much you have implemented, how much you have practiced, how much you have implemented. That gives the confidence. If you have developed each and every mini project and major project APIs with the UI, definitely you will get very good confidence to attend the interviews. And our WhatsApp group is also open. So the people who are attending the interviews, they are sharing some questions. They're sharing some questions, whatever the questions that they have faced. They are sharing those interview questions in the group. So group will be open. I'm also part of that group. If you have any questions and if you need any other topic that is required, then I will make a video and I will upload that video in our channel as well. So when you are facing some issues, you can post in the group. I will be also part of that. I will be checking that. Any questions that you are having, you can share in that group and we can get in touch with that. And I'm waiting for your success stories. So please attend the interviews and perform well so that I will be feel happy. Okay. For Java project, there is no end, right? It's depends on your confidence, how much you have practiced. Right? So you can, if you attend the interview, then you will understand what you have learned, how much you learned here, and is that knowledge sufficient to attend the interviews or not. For the software engineer, there is no end for learning. So always we need to be a student and we have to learn the new things. We need to be everyday learner. You need to be a learner for every day. As a software engineer, whatever the tools you learned in your project, maybe different tools will be available. Whatever the concepts we have learned, whatever the requirements we have developed in your project, different concepts may be available. Okay. So you need to have the confidence to understand the concept. You should have the confidence to do the coding on your own. You need to be an independent programmer. You need to be the independent programmer for that. Okay. Cool. So I will share this summary in our group. I will share this summary in our group, guys. So thank you for joining this. I wish you all the best. I wish you all the best for all of you. So please do attend the interviews. If you are not started yet, if you already started, all the best. So in first or second interview, it's difficult to get the job, but it will take time. So it depends on your practice. Seriously, if you have taken this course and if you practiced all the things, the mini projects, DB analysis, backend APIs, front-end development, then definitely you will have that confidence to crack the interview. So from my side, all the best. Also, please be in touch. I will be part of that group. Any questions that you get in the interview, any difficulties that you are facing, you can share in the group. So I will be happy to answer those things. Good. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.